While shopping at the mall with my best friend, I saw my boyfriend of 6 years. He had his arm around another girl, laughing happily. When he noticed me, he didn't turn away in panic, nor did he look guilty. He even waved at me. When I returned to the home we shared, he was sitting on the sofa, smoking. His exhaustion was plain to see. He was still as gentle as ever. Baby, if I had to rely on my own efforts, who knows how long it would take for me to make a place for myself in this city. I nodded in understanding, swallowing back the words I had planned to say about my family background. Then I turned and left, to go home and accept the arranged marriage. Baby, you really convinced your family to let you marry freely? I'm so jealous. Elsie clung to my arm, casually pointing at an expensive handbag on the display counter, but her eyes sparkled as she stared at me. I lowered my gaze, then lifted it again with a radiant smile. Yeah. I did win the right to choose my own marriage. But I also lost my influence over my family's business. From now on, I would only receive dividends from my shares. But compared to Chapman, none of that mattered. I slung an arm around Elsie's shoulders, speaking lazily. Now I can live a life of luxury and leisure. My voice cut off abruptly. Through the spotless glass of the luxury store, I saw the boutique across from us. The man I had loved for 6 years was there, holding another woman, laughing happily. Their intimacy made it clear, this wasn't new. The woman was bending down to admire a piece of jewelry, while Chapman, with nothing to do, casually glanced around. And then his eyes met mine. I thought he would panic, that he'd be flustered. But he simply waved at me, as if I were just an ordinary acquaintance. Elsie's chattering stopped too, she had clearly seen it as well. We should go over there, she said. I hesitated. Elsie, he still doesn't know the truth about me. When I met Chapman, we were still in university. Following my family's instructions, I kept a low profile, leaving behind the privileged life I was used to, trying to experience a few years of ordinary freedom. People like us rarely have control over our own fate. Chapman was the one reckless decision I had made, knowing it was bound to end badly. I grabbed Elsie's trembling hand and whispered, "Forget it. I'll handle this myself." I had always been reserved with my emotions, and even now, I kept my composure. Like nothing had happened. But I knew, inside, the pain was suffocating. Still, I forced myself to act normal, bid Elsie goodbye, and just like when I first left home, I rode my bicycle back to the apartment Chapman and I had rented together. In late autumn, even walking was enough to make a person shiver. By the time I parked my bicycle in its designated spot, the sky had already darkened. Dressed in a dark coat, I blended into the dimly lit surroundings. From there, I had a clear view of Chapman, stepping out of a pink Ferrari. He was grinning sweetly as he spoke, coaxing the woman inside to step out and give him a passionate kiss. They were tangled up in each other. If I weren't his legitimate girlfriend, maybe even I would have applauded their love story. I didn't know how long I stood there staring, maybe I wasn't even watching at all. When the pink Ferrari sped off, its tires splashed water from the roadside, soaking me completely. The freezing chill jolted me awake. Drenched and disheartened, I dragged myself upstairs. When I opened the door, the usual warmth in Chapman's voice was gone. Only silence remained. A silence so deep, it felt like the darkness of the night was brewing something even more terrifying. "You're back?" The only light in the living room came from a small lamp. Its dim glow was enough for me to see Chapman clearly. His refined features were marred by an exhaustion he couldn't hide. The cigarette between his fingers flickered in the dim light, and at his feet was a pile of burnt-out cigarette butts. "Don't smoke so much," I said. "All right," he responded softly. I stood at the entryway, not stepping further inside. "Do you love her?" It was the only question I had left about our relationship. Because just last night, we had been tangled in each other's arms, lost in passion. Nothing about it seemed like the actions of someone who had fallen out of love. Chapman let out a low chuckle, his voice both careless and heavy. "Love?" He gestured toward the window. The city lights of a city shone even brighter than the daytime, dazzling and extravagant. "I love you, Gladys. But that won't help me survive in this city. Your beauty, your personality, none of it matters in the face of wealth and power. But her, she can help me." Chapman's voice grew lower, His gaze darkened for a fleeting second, but then he quickly regained his gentle demeanor. If I relied only on myself, who knows how long it would take to carve out a place for myself here. The fist I had clenched behind my back suddenly relaxed. A deep, indescribable disappointment settled in my chest. I had thought he had simply fallen out of love. That maybe I could understand what she had that I didn't. But it turned out to be something so simple. She could offer him wealth and status in this city. And just like that, the confession I had planned for tonight no longer seemed necessary. The pure love I had vowed to my family was now nothing more than a joke. Maybe it was my silence, or maybe Chapman really didn't want me clinging to him anymore. He took off his Patek Philippe watch and placed it on the coffee table, then pulled out the watch I had given him from his pocket. He set them side by side. I didn't understand his meaning. She gave me a Patek Philippe without batting an eye. And yours? Where did you even buy this cheap knockoff? A sharp pain stabbed through my chest. I strode to the coffee table, snatching up the custom-made watch I had gone through endless trouble to order. Without another word, without sparing him another glance. I could hear the disdain in his voice. This man was already rotten to the core. Throw away everything else that belongs to me, I said. Then I stepped out into the darkness. The apartment complex we had rented wasn't new, but it wasn't old either. I glanced back at the place I had once called home. Let out a soft laugh. Then I took out my phone. I lost Clyde. Come pick me up. A sigh came from the other end. Love is only pure when material needs are fully met. Mom, Dad, and I were never trying to hurt you. I kicked at a loose stone on the ground, neither agreeing nor refuting his words. Maybe Clyde was right. But wealth had also tainted Chapman's love. He didn't love me enough, nor did he love her enough. But now, that had nothing to do with me anymore. Clyde arrived quickly. This time, he didn't drive his usual Cayenne, but a sleek black luxury van. I didn't have time to wonder why. The chilly night air urged me into the car. A tissue was handed to me. I wiped away the single tear that had escaped my eye, not looking back. I accept the arranged marriage. I'll marry Delbert. A deep chuckle came from the back seat. Miss Gladys, then we can register as a legal couple tomorrow. A chill ran down my spine. I slowly turned my head. And met a familiar yet unfamiliar face. The boy I once knew had shed all traces of his youthful awkwardness. In his place was a man, exuding authority and nobility. A far cry from the boy who once struggled to speak standard Mandarin. I forced a stiff smile and, like a fool, added a wave of my hand. You speak much better English than when you were younger. Then I shut my mouth. I wanted to slap myself. Back in the day, when Delbert lived in a city, his B-city accent had made him the target of ridicule among the elite socialites. Even now, despite his towering success, I worried that his past would still irritate him. I bit my lip in frustration, staying silent. But Delbert only chuckled, his deep voice filled with amusement. Well, I'll never be as fluent as you. After all, I'm not from a city. Maybe one day, I can teach you some B-city dialect in return? With just a few words, he had effortlessly diffused my awkward jab. The future? I lifted my eyes to the rearview mirror and met Delbert's gaze. His sharp, narrow eyes were filled with intensity and a sense of possession, unyielding, leaving no room for refusal. Suddenly, I remembered something my brother, Clyde, once said. Love is only pure when material needs are fully met. At that moment, as I locked eyes with Delbert, a strong curiosity surged within me. How pure would his love be? I wanted to know. I wanted to test it. So under his unwavering gaze, I nodded and softly said, all right. Clyde probably won't be able to pick you up today. For the first time, I caught a genuine smile in Delbert's eyes. I tilted my head. Why? Delbert raised an eyebrow and pointed toward the sky. Your sister-in-law went abroad. I nodded in understanding. Clyde used to be a notorious playboy, refusing to settle down. No one expected him to get forced into marriage and then end up falling in love after the fact. But my sister-in-law? She was truly something else. Every year, she'd run away 3 or 4 times, and Clyde would chase after her like clockwork. With our parents living in another city, the only thing left in a city was an empty house. I didn't want to go back. Turning my body slightly, I looked at Delbert, who was sitting in the back seat, and put on a pitiful expression. I'm homeless now. What should I do? Delbert adjusted his glasses, glanced at me, and spoke in a slow, measured tone. I won't let you be homeless. But Miss Gladys, I need you to go home and get your identification. Can we register our marriage tomorrow? I froze, thinking he was joking earlier. But now, there was a weight to his words that made me take them seriously. My hesitation made him lower his voice and repeat the question, this time with a trace of impatience. Snapping out of my thoughts, I quickly gave the driver my family home's address. Delbert's expression finally eased. When we arrived at the family estate, I suddenly hesitated. I sat in the car, twisting the hem of my clothes, reluctant to step out. Through the rearview mirror, I met Delbert's gaze again, and reason slowly returned to me. Before I got into your car, I had just broken up, Mr. Delbert. His eyes, in the dark, carried a dangerous glint, like a predator locking onto its prey. I hesitated for a moment, then gathered the courage to continue. I wasn't planning on jumping into another relationship so soon. Delbert's gaze flickered, and a smirk played at the corner of his lips. I couldn't quite read his thoughts, but I could hear his voice clearly. This is just a business marriage, Miss Gladys. Talking about love would be laughable. I understood the unspoken message behind his words. A sense of relief washed over me, but at the same time, an odd feeling of unwillingness crept in. Unwilling about what? I didn't know. But still, I stepped out of the car, my expression calm as always. Only the force with which I shut the car door betrayed the emotions I couldn't quite name. Steadying my steps, I unlocked the front door and walked in. Janet, our housekeeper, opened the door for me in her pajamas. She looked startled when she saw me, as if she wanted to say something but held back. It was obvious she didn't dare speak, probably because I had spent the last few days fighting with my family over my planned marriage to Chapman. The worst fight happened just this morning. For the first time in my life, I smashed a glass in the house and voluntarily gave up half of my inheritance. Clyde was so furious, he could barely stand straight. Before kicking me out, he spat out, I won't care about you anymore. Not long after, I ran into Chapman at the mall. Now, my disastrous evening was coming full circle. Pressing my fingers to my temple, I sighed. Not a single thing had gone right today. But I hadn't forgotten why I was back. Lowering my voice, I asked, do you know where my ID is? Janet's eyes widened in shock. Her expression turned wary. Are you seriously sneaking back here in the middle of the night just to get your ID for that man? Do you want to drive your parents to their graves? I don't know where it is. And even if I did, I wouldn't give it to you. I stared at Janet, momentarily stunned by how fiercely she was guarding the household registry. Where did she get the idea that I was here to steal it? I opened my mouth. Janet, I'm not. I watched you grow up. Is it really worth breaking your family's heart over a man? Janet's voice softened into a pleading tone, but every time I tried to explain, she cut me off. I had always been patient with the elders who raised me. So I stood there with my head lowered, enduring half an hour of her scolding. I wondered if Delbert was still waiting for me. Sighing, I finally decided to interrupt her. Just as I was about to speak, a warm hand landed on my shoulder. A familiar, pleasant voice followed. Long time no see, Janet. How have you been? Janet, now older, squinted at him before reaching for her reading glasses, wiping them and putting them on. She studied Delbert closely. Delbert? It's me, Miss Janet. Janet broke into a smile and commented, your English has improved a lot. I couldn't help but let out a laugh, then shot her pleading looks, silently begging her to drop the subject. Clearly, she didn't get the message. But then, her gaze shifted to the hand Delbert still had on my shoulder. You too? Delbert, still playing the role of a well-mannered junior, replied obediently, Gladys and I came back to get her ID. We're registering our marriage tomorrow. Janet turned to me. Really? I sighed, feeling a little helpless, but nodded. Really? The entire family had been pushing me to marry Delbert. Janet was no exception. Now that I had confirmed it, she immediately rushed to the study. Before long, she returned and shoved my ID into Delbert's hands. Then she shot me a warning look. Don't you dare take this from him, Delbert. I bit my tongue and stayed silent. Delbert, suppressing a laugh, accepted the ID with great seriousness. Don't worry, I won't let her have it. I'm taking her with me tonight, and we'll register first thing in the morning. Good. Under Janet's watchful eyes, we turned and left. Back in the car, silence filled the space between us. Neither of us spoke. Not until the driver pulled into the underground parking lot of an upscale apartment complex in the city center. I have no intention of having a marriage in name only, Miss Gladys. Now alone in the elevator, I faced Delbert directly. I was taken aback but figured it was best to clarify everything now that we were getting married. Nodding, I met his gaze and said, "Fine. But I won't tolerate my husband having other women." Delbert raised an eyebrow. I continued, "In our circles, that's not exactly uncommon, is it? Arranged marriages, heirs born out of duty, and lovers kept on the side, it was all just part of the game, as long as things never got messy." Delbert controlled a business empire, holding the economic lifeline of B-City in his hands. His name echoed in every high society event across the country. A man like him would never lack admirers. Delbert studied me as I frowned. "I'm serious." "All right. We'll sign a contract. Of course, it won't include premarital assets." I stepped closer. "Do you even realize what you're saying, Delbert? My wealth, my everything, I'm willing to share it with you." At that moment, Delbert was utterly captivating. His deep, dark eyes felt like they were pulling me in. If we were getting married tomorrow, then going a little too far tonight wouldn't matter. I stood on my tiptoes and followed my heart, pressing a kiss on his lips. Delbert was too tall, I only managed to kiss his jaw. A firm grip tightened around my waist, lifting me effortlessly. In an instant, I lost the right to breathe freely. His kiss was forceful, domineering, even laced with a hint of aggression. I could feel the faint sting of a small cut on my lips. Just as I neared suffocation, I pushed against him. We both gasped for breath. I was still in his arms, our foreheads pressed together. Just then, the elevator doors slowly slid open. His voice was husky, tinged with an intoxicating allure. "We're home. Do you want to go inside?" I thought it was my imagination, but his gaze carried an unexpected reverence. As if I were a deity, capable of passing judgment on his sins. I tightened my arms around his neck. "Let's go in. You won't regret it?" I was more impatient than he was. Instead of answering, I tugged him out of the elevator with barely any effort. Standing at his front door, I chuckled softly. "I won't." "Of course, you still have until sunrise to change your mind." His response was the soft click of a fingerprint lock. The dimly lit room swallowed us. I was lifted again, pressed against the wall, kissed with a feverish intensity. That night, Delbert and I didn't cross the final line. But short of that last step, we did everything else imaginable. By the time we were done, it was deep into the night. My clothes were no longer wearable. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, dressed in Delbert's shirt, gazing at the distant apartment complex. The same complex where Chapman and I had lived together. Delbert came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist and lifting me into his embrace, settling us both onto the balcony sofa. "What are you looking at?" His warm breath tickled my neck, making me squirm in his arms. I stared at him, hesitating. Should I tell him the truth? I pressed my lips together, then finally raised a hand, pointing at the complex. "I lived there for almost 2 years. I took a deep breath and continued, "with my ex-boyfriend. We just broke up today. And now I'm here, in your arms. Do you think I—" Before I could finish, his lips crashed onto mine in a storm of kisses, silencing me. I had no choice but to endure the possessiveness that belonged to Delbert alone. Only when I could no longer take it did he pull away. Calmly, he extended his wrist, showing me his watch. I scratched my watch, but it still tells time. It's 3 a.m. You have 4.5 hours to rest. At 7:30, we're getting married. Tomorrow marks the beginning of your new life. I'll allow you to be sad just for tonight." I ran my fingers over the scratch on his watch, $1 million timepiece, damaged when he lifted me at the door, and he didn't even care. Just a Patek Philippe. Meanwhile, Chapman had used a watch to trample my dignity into the dirt. I let out a quiet laugh and grasped Delbert's hand. I'll buy you a better one. Then, I slipped his watch off his wrist and fastened it around mine. I rummaged through my discarded clothes, found the watch I had once prepared as a gift for Chapman, and tossed it into the trash. Delbert's wrist was much thicker than mine, and the watch slid up and down my arm. Under his watchful gaze, I finished what I was doing, then nestled back into his embrace. This one, let me have it. That night, it felt like I had lost something. Yet, at the same time, I had gained something far better. Unexpectedly, I slept soundly. The next morning, when I opened my eyes, I was no longer in Delbert's apartment. Where is this? I rubbed my eyes. Delbert was looking at me. The corner of his lips curled. Outside the government office. I sat up with a jolt, looking out the car window. Sure enough, we were parked in front of the Civil Affairs Bureau. The sun was already up, and newlyweds with beaming smiles walked in and out of the building. I glanced down at my sleepwear, then at Delbert, who was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. Stammering, I asked, You expect me to get married dressed like this? Don't worry. The makeup artist is in the car behind us. Your outfit is ready too. You were sleeping too soundly, I couldn't bear to wake you. Delbert's voice was gentle, almost making me believe that he truly loved me. I nodded. Then I'll go get ready first? Delbert stepped out of the car and said, Change into your clothes first. The door closed, and the window blinds were drawn tightly, ensuring no one outside could see in. I picked up the simple white dress and slipped it on, only to realize there was a carefully hidden veil tucked inside. Delbert had thought of everything. This was far better than the civil wedding I had once envisioned. Even when I held the marriage certificate in my hands, it still felt surreal. For so long, I had thought the only person I'd ever walk into this place with was Chapman. Yet in just one day, that person had changed. And strangely, I felt a quiet joy. Gladys. I was staring at the marriage certificate when Delbert's voice startled me. I patted my chest, steadying my breath. What is it? His expression held a hint of guilt. I might need to make a trip back to B City. Do you want to come with me? I pressed my lips together, thinking for a moment. Spending our wedding night apart doesn't feel right, does it? Delbert laughed, his whole demeanor softening. He ruffled my hair indulgently. Then we'll go together. After leaving the registry, we headed straight to the airport, boarding Delbert's private jet. Just before boarding, my phone rang. An unknown number. I answered, only to hear Chapman's weary voice on the other end. I saw you at the airport. Where are you going? I froze for a moment. Delbert's grip on my hand tightened. Who is it? I hung up, blocked the number, and smiled at Delbert. No one important. When the plane landed, everything in B City felt unfamiliar to me. I had never been here before. My only impression of B City was Delbert's accent. His voice was pleasant, though in a city, it had always seemed slightly out of place. In the car, Delbert opened his laptop for a video conference, absently rubbing his thumb against the back of my hand. With nothing else to do, I snapped a picture and posted it on social media. Elsie immediately liked it and sent me a message. Why are you in B City? I found out who that woman with Chapman was, she's from B City. Oh my God, I heard she's coming back today too. Are you going to confront her? Wait for me. I'm booking a flight. I won't let you suffer alone. Elsie had always had an overactive imagination. I touched the men's watch on my wrist and chuckled. I sent her a photo. You're overthinking. Just here for a trip with my husband. The messages stopped. Then, moments later, my phone rang furiously. I glanced at Delbert, who was still in his meeting, and hurriedly rejected the call. But Elsie wouldn't give up, she kept calling. Answer it. I covered the speaker. Won't it disturb you? It won't. Go ahead. With Delbert's permission, I finally picked up, lowering the volume just in case. Elsie's shrill voice burst through. Your husband? Who did you marry? You didn't just pick someone random to piss off Chapman, did you? Are you out of your mind? I stole a glance at Delbert, making sure he wasn't listening, then exhaled softly. My husband is Delbert. Lost in my conversation with Elsie, I didn't notice. Delbert, still in his meeting, was smiling. As I explained everything to Elsie on the way, I repeatedly reassured her that I was serious and not just doing this to spite Chapman. Only then did she finally relax. After promising to come find me in B City in a couple of days, she hung up the phone. By the time I ended the call, the car had already stopped in the parking spot. Delbert had long since finished his own call and was now resting his head on his hand, watching me. I had gotten used to Delbert looking at me like that. "Sweetie." Delbert narrowed his eyes slightly, a smile playing at the corners of his lips as he called me wife. My whole body froze. It was like an electric current had run through my spine, sending tingling waves across my skin. I fought the urge to smile, pretending to be calm as I replied, "Babe." Delbert clearly hadn't expected that response from me. He clicked his tongue and immediately called the driver who had just left. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but before the driver had even exited the parking lot, he turned back, quickly got into the driver's seat, and drove off again. I looked at Delbert in confusion. "Where are we going?" Delbert took my hand, gently squeezing my knuckles as he said, "I was going to take you to the racetrack to pick out a pony, but then I suddenly remembered, this is our wedding night. The most important thing hasn't been done yet." I wasn't some naive girl. Of course, I knew exactly what the most important thing on a wedding night was. I didn't say anything, but my fingers couldn't help teasingly scratching his palm. Delbert's house in B City was an estate, far more luxurious than the penthouse he had in a city. It was obvious that his place in a city was just a temporary residence. But the estate was too big, and Delbert's patience seemed to shrink with every step we took. By the time we stumbled into the bedroom, lips locked and tangled together, Delbert suddenly growled, "I need to change houses." It was an oddly timed comment, one that should have ruined the mood, but instead, it sent a shiver down my spine. I ran my fingers along his waist and stomach, trying to provoke him further. But as our movements grew more intimate, I realized something: Delbert was inexperienced. The realization shocked me. I cupped his face and asked, "You've never had a girlfriend before?" The ever-composed man was now sweating, his eyes flickering away in embarrassment. I refused to let him look away. "Look at me." Delbert lifted his gaze, his dark eyes drowning in desire. His voice was hoarse, his whole being trembling like a puppy pulled out of water, drenched, pitiful, yet irresistible. I felt a ringing in my ears, but I still heard him clearly. With a voice so beautiful it could steal a soul, he whispered, "I only love you. For so many years, it's only ever been you." My heart trembled. I almost couldn't believe it. But at the moment I gave myself to him completely, Clyde's words surfaced in my mind. When you have enough material wealth, love becomes pure. And as I thought about how Delbert had been exiled to a city and had to fight his way back to B City alone, a dull ache spread through my chest. I started crying. Delbert immediately panicked, quickly grabbing tissues to wipe my tears. "Don't cry. If you don't want this, we'll stop." It wasn't that I didn't want to. I pulled him closer, refusing to let him go. "You could see my old apartment from your place in a city. You bought that place on purpose, didn't you?" I felt his entire body tense up. We had only truly been together for 2 days. Yet now, my mind was flooded with images of Delbert's loneliness in a city and the struggles he faced returning to B City. I didn't fully understand everything, but I had remembered every word Clyde had told me. Back then, I had only thought I was looking out for a childhood friend. But now, thinking back, I realized that somewhere along the way, Delbert's pain had carved deep scars in my heart. I leaned into him, embracing everything. "I want this, Delbert. I've always wanted this." Of course, embracing everything came with a price. I ended up stuck in bed for 5 whole days. Even today, when we finally went out, Delbert had to carry me. "I'm taking you to pick a pony," he said. After 5 days in bed, I had learned quite a few things. For example, B City had a prestigious racetrack, and Delbert was on its board of directors. And every horse owner at the racetrack was a person of power, wealth, or both. Simply put, anyone in the country who had business ties to B City dreamed of becoming a horse owner. But it wasn't easy. The entrance fee alone was exorbitant, and you needed recommendations from at least 100 current horse owners. The money was the easy part. The real challenge was networking. Even then, a final review by the board of directors determined whether someone could officially become a horse owner. It was an exclusive, cutthroat process. So, does that mean it'll be hard for me to become a horse owner? I yawned, leaning into Delbert's embrace. Delbert wiped the lingering tears from my nap away and playfully pinched my nose. Not at all. You own half of my fortune, plus you have both me and Clyde vouching for you. Who would dare say no to you? That made me sit up straight. Clyde is a horse owner too? No, he's a board member. That confused me. Why would Clyde, a businessman from a city, be involved in B-City's affairs? But after knowing this, I felt reassured and lazily snuggled back into Delbert's arms, waiting until we arrived at the racetrack to pick out a horse. What I didn't expect was to see someone there. Chapman was standing at the entrance, holding an umbrella for a woman. His posture was stiff, so rigid he looked more like a security guard than the actual guards nearby. The moment Delbert appeared, the woman quickly approached and introduced herself. I caught a few words. She wanted to become a horse owner. Behind her, Chapman stared at me, his eyes dark and unreadable. Delbert definitely knew who Chapman was. But for whatever reason, he let Chapman and the woman follow us in. I tugged at his wrist, lowering my voice. What are you doing? Delbert glanced at me. After making sure there were no strange emotions in my eyes, he let out a relieved breath. They bullied you. I want to get revenge for you. I was stunned for a moment before wrapping my arms around his. Well then, thank you, babe. It had only been a week since I last saw Chapman. And yet, seeing him again stirred absolutely nothing in me. The heartbreak I had felt before now seemed like nothing more than a fleeting illusion. Still, I held on to a lingering resentment. The way we broke up had been too humiliating. Watching him make a fool of himself today would be his form of apology. I didn't know much about horses, but Delbert was an expert. Under his advice, I picked a stunning pure white horse with a golden sheen under the sunlight, beautiful and noble. The woman behind us showered me with flattery, while Chapman's eyes nearly bulged out of their sockets. There was envy. There was jealousy. And there was something else, something that looked a lot like hatred. I didn't understand Chapman's stare, but I chose to ignore it. Delbert, as always, was thoughtful. He smiled gently at me. I had an equestrian outfit prepared for you. Go change, and I'll take Miss Kate upstairs for a meeting. Once I'm back, I'll teach you how to ride. I nodded. So, the woman's name was Kate. With that in mind, I followed the staff to Delbert's private changing room. But as soon as I stepped out, I ran into Chapman smoking in a corner. You're not with Miss Kate? Smoking is prohibited here. I pointed at the no smoking sign, my tone indifferent, like I was making small talk with a stranger. Chapman silently stubbed out his cigarette and tossed it in the trash. Why didn't you answer my calls that day? Did you block me? I frowned, already annoyed. We'd broken up. I don't want to be in contact with you anymore. Broken up? Chapman scoffed. Without you, I've been miserable, Gladys. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I rolled my eyes, gripping my phone tightly in case I needed to call Delbert. Chapman continued, I really miss you. Can we get back together? Don't degrade yourself like this. These rich men, they're just playing with us. I don't know how he figured out that I had given up on myself. Looking at Chapman's sorrowful gaze, I suddenly remembered that I had never been honest with him from the start. I pointed at the Patek Philippe on his wrist and mocked, Isn't this watch enough for you? Are you thinking of switching it for some cheap knockoff that I don't even know where you bought? As I stretched out my hand, the watch on my wrist, Delbert's watch, was clearly visible. Chapman reached out and grabbed my wrist, his eyes fixed on the watch. He only gave you a scratched-up watch and that's enough to make you follow him willingly? Maybe, he gave you something else? You have no dignity. You've really hit rock bottom, haven't you? Chapman's grip was so tight that my bones ached, and I couldn't break free. His frenzied gaze even scared me a little. It was as if he felt like his possessions were being tainted by someone else, the desire for destruction spreading across his eyes. Let go of me. I lowered my voice and slapped him across the face. The sound was crisp, and immediately Chapman's face flushed red. You broke up with me to climb the social ladder in a city, and I didn't say anything. Now you come back to bother me? Chapman, have some decency. Decency? Delbert's married, it's a business marriage, and you, a mistress, don't know the meaning of decency? Looking at Chapman's twisted expression really made me want to laugh in anger. I gathered all my strength to shake off his hand, grabbed my phone, and called Delbert. The phone was picked up quickly. Baby, come to the dressing room door. I've been slandered as a mistress. I hung up right after. Chapman was still in shock, and I turned to enter the dressing room, locking the door behind me to calm down. I stared at my feet, breathing hard, but still felt unsatisfied. I opened the door again, peeked out, and when I saw Chapman still standing there, I went out and kicked him hard. He wasn't prepared and fell straight to the ground. Scumbag. What's going on? Delbert walked up behind me and took my hand. I explained everything to him, and it was obvious that Delbert was angry. He stared coldly at Chapman. Do you know that defamation and slander are illegal? Delbert fiercely pulled me behind him, and for some reason, Chapman also braced himself and started to confront Delbert. You're already married, Mr. Delbert. My girlfriend is young. You can't just manipulate her like that. Delbert took off his glasses and placed them in my hand before pushing me aside. He told me not to get close. I grabbed his hand and shook my head. Don't be impulsive. Chapman was already beyond redemption, and I wouldn't let him stir up any more feelings in me. What I was really worried about was Delbert getting hurt. Delbert crouched down and looked at me. That day, when you cried in my car, my heart almost broke. Let me get revenge on him, okay? He patiently lowered his gaze, waiting for my answer. Meanwhile, Chapman, standing behind Delbert, kept provoking us with harsh words. Let go of her, she's mine. We've been together for 6 years. Gladys, are you really going to be a mistress to a married man? I took a deep breath. I thought Chapman would understand once he heard how I addressed Delbert, but unfortunately, he didn't. I hugged Delbert and buried my face in his chest, rubbing against him. Don't get hurt. Delbert patted my back and pulled me away from him, then threw a heavy punch right at Chapman's head. How dare you say you were together for 6 years? I put up with you for 6 years. Fine, I can accept that you were good to her, but I can let go. But you? You cheated. And you have the audacity to be shameless about it. With those 3 lines, Delbert landed 3 punches on Chapman. Chapman couldn't fight back, but his gaze was still full of fury. I grabbed Delbert's arm, my voice choking. Enough. Chapman, his marriage is with me. You already have another woman. Let's just part ways peacefully. Please, don't come bother me again. Chapman's eyes were wide open in disbelief as he kept shaking his head. I looked at Delbert's hand to make sure it wasn't hurt, then composed myself and turned back to face Chapman. I fought for my right to choose my marriage. I was going to tell you that day. I didn't have the chance. Chapman, I kept my family a secret from you, and you cheated. We owe each other nothing. Please, don't disturb me again. Chapman's eyes suddenly went cold. But I knew it wasn't because he loved me. It was because of my background as a wealthy heiress. Chapman collapsed to the ground, and I didn't want to see him anymore. I grabbed Delbert's hand and turned to leave. Delbert, with his hand still aching from the punch, made a pitiful face. It hurt so much. He was acting so helpless, so I played along, seriously inspecting his hand. It was definitely red and must have hurt. I gently blew on it, then rubbed it, scolding him. I told you not to do anything. You just had to hold back. Delbert pulled me into his arms. He made you cry. I wasn't happy. But it's okay, from now on, I'll make you happy. When Delbert said he would make me happy, it wasn't just empty words. In B-City, I spent over a month, and not a single day was without joy. Especially on the day he proposed. He went all out. At first, I thought it was just a normal candlelit dinner. But when the fireworks went off over Victoria Harbor, Delbert kneeled before me. His eyes were full of devotion, and he only had a small version of me in his hand. I've loved you for so many years. We will have many, many more years together. Will you marry me? I extended my hand, waiting for him to slip the ring on my finger. I believed that he loved me, and I believed I was worthy of love. Being held by Delbert, kissed passionately, I responded just as eagerly. Clyde wasn't back from abroad, but as soon as he heard we had registered our marriage, he sent me a wedding gift. It was a will that he had signed with Delbert. Even though Delbert was so young, and even though we hadn't been together then, he had already given me most of his fortune. Clyde said he didn't understand why Delbert loved me so much when I had little connection to him. I didn't understand either. So when he proposed, I asked him. Delbert took my hand, our fingers interlaced. Are the fireworks beautiful? They're beautiful. His gaze softened, as if reminiscing about the past. When I first arrived in a city, there was a little girl who took my hand and welcomed me. She complimented my accent, saying it sounded lovely. Back then, I thought, this little girl is so beautiful. More beautiful than the most brilliant fireworks. The end.